Okay, good morning, everybody. We'll get this started. My name's Clayton Hyam. I'm the presiding member of today's panel, and with me I have Ms. Lee O'Donoghue, who's the deputy presiding member, and Mr. Peter Lee, the third specialist member, and from the City of South Perth, Councillor War. So I'll declare the meeting open at 9:40, and in doing so, acknowledge the traditional owners and elders past and present, the land upon which we're all meeting today. I have an apology from, first of all, I just need to let you know that the meeting is recorded and live streamed in accordance with regulation 42A. I have an apology from Councillor Glenn Cridland. There are no members listed as being on leave of absence. And minutes from previous DAP meetings are available on the DAP website. Right, we'll move to declarations of due consideration. All members are familiar with material before you today. Councillor Wall, can you indicate? Yes, thank you. Are there any disclosures of interest? No? No? Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on then to item 4.1, which is the amendment to the visitor parking condition of approval for the multiple dwelling development. Have a presentation from Mr. Murray. Mr. Murray. And Mr. Reid, I guess.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and present to you on this revision, potential revision to the DA. So we've been working on this project for a couple of years. It's actually out in the marketplace at the moment. We've been talking to the South Perth City Council since prior to acquiring the site, and we've engaged with the DRP. We've taken up a lot of their recommendations during the process, which we found very useful, actually, very positive experience. We've been very clear with everyone along the way that what we thought was needed for this project to be viable, to be able to get the thing built. And we're trying to put 121 reasonably affordable apartments in current context into that Como precinct. And we've got 180-degree water views. Of course, got freeway in front of us. We're in a cul-de-sac, in a quiet cul-de-sac. We like the location, and we've currently sold something like 46 apartments out of 121. There's a difficult build cost environment at the present time, and our site sits 2.5 metres above the waterline of the river. So we were very reluctant to go to a second basement. And the only way with the maximum parking we could put on ground, with pulling the building in on ground and in the basement to allow for the deep earth requirement, the only way we could get sufficient cars to have one car bay for every one bedroom, one for every two, and two for every three, which is the minimum we think to sell apartments in Como at a reasonable price, notwithstanding that we're 300 metres from a train station, was to move some of the visitor parking out onto the street. To do that, we're removing a number of crossovers that currently exist for the units on the three strata title blocks. We're creating 4 embayed bays on our side of the street. There are no properties on the other side of the street, and there's currently room for 7 cars to park there. And there are currently no restrictions on parking in that street, albeit there could be. There's usually during the day a couple of cars parked in that cul-de-sac, who are probably people visiting or using the train station. And 150 odd metres away from our site, there's 50 plus bays in a car park that was created many years ago for a pedestrian crossover over the freeway. In the last 2 years, I've never seen a single car parked in that car park other than my own. I'm of the view, having been involved in development for a long time, that you put visitor bays behind a security gate, makes it very difficult actually for visitors to access, and most of our visitors are going to park in the 4 embayed bays we're creating and the 7 vacant spots opposite our block, no matter what we do on site. We did offer in our DA to put 5 bays behind the security, and that was the maximum we could provide and still give 1 bay per 1 bedroom apartment. And I note that the minimum requirement's 0.75, but really only in the CBD and buildings like Perth Hub have we been able to get any significant number of units away anywhere in the Perth metropolitan area without a car bay. So we have, as a result of the DA approval, 11 apartments that don't have a bay. We've priced those $50,000, $60,000 under the similar apartments that do have a bay, and we haven't sold a single one. We've lifted the prices on all the other bays to try and cover construction costs 3 times since we've launched the project, and we've not changed the price at all on the ones that don't have a car, and we've been totally unsuccessful in making any sales, which leads us to come here today to say we haven't asked for 20 floors and settled for 9 or asked for anything silly. We've asked for what we felt from the outset was necessary to get these 121 apartments built. We've been very open. We've engaged with council officers. We've engaged with the DRP. We can't get these units away. You can't, if we're going to have to discount these apartments by 100, 150,000 below the market value of similar apartments with a car bay in this building, that's another $1.5 million of revenue that we've foregone in a market where we all know that every dollar of revenue is vitally important to get project success. So we're very keen to start building it. We're working with builders. We're hoping to get underway in July of this year. We've got a great project. We've got one arm tied behind our backs, and we're asking today if you would please release us on what we think are very reasonable terms to get this thing done. Thanks very much.
Mean to say that the presentation is now restricted to 3 minutes.
Yeah. I was trying to kick him from behind.
Was I more than 3?
I'll give you a little bit of latitude there.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
There we go.
Okay.
You're right to go through.
Thank you, and thanks, Mr. Chairman and panel members. So, as you've heard from Angus, if anywhere should get a reduction for visitor parking, it's this site. We're a 350 metre walk from the Canning Bridge train station, 5 kilometre bike ride to town, have a street that will only be developed on one side, ample street parking and completely empty car park with 54 bays in it, just 170 metres away. So again, as you've heard from Angus, 1 car bay per unit and 2 bays. The 3-bedders is not overparked from a practical or saleability point of view, but it's actually not overparked from a planning point of view either. The R-codes and Canning Bridge ACP standards of 0.75 per 1-bedroom apartment are minimum standards. Even the core precincts of Q1 and Q2 allow for a maximum of 1 bay for each 1-bedder, but for Q3 there is no maximum. The maximum under the R-code apartment guide is 1.5 bays per single bed apartment. 1 bay per apartment simply complies. It's not overparked, as the city's saying. Whilst residents working in the CBD will use public transport on weekdays, nearly everyone would need a car at some point for the weekly shop, visit to the doctors or travel, or even just for resale. So we have a street frontage with 5 crossovers that can easily be enhanced by converting 4 into embayed parking, and clearly the other side of the street is only used for daily train commuters during weekdays, which can always be managed if ever needs be. These 4 bays are on our site, are on our approved plan, with no conditions, no removal conditions. As it stands, we are effectively building 20 visitor car parking bays in a location where the Canning Bridge ACP is trying to discourage private vehicle use. So 5 visitor bays on our site is a clearly reasonable approach, and at over 30% is actually way more than other nearby developments, including Paradiso up the hill, which has no on-site visitor bays, and all bays are actually on the village. More visitor bays on site won't stop visitors parking in the street, as it's more convenient, being closer to the entry and no need to be buzzed in. There'll be no change to street parking, providing more bays on site. It's far better to encourage greater diversity by having the 3-bedders with 2 bays, and each are then attractive for a shared household or couples with a child, and then just 1 bay for every other apartment, including the 2-bedders, which again is compliant and well under the maximum of 2 bays per apartment. So we're simply asking the panel to fairly apply the visitor parking requirements for the development as specifically advocated by the R-codes and the core principles of the Canning Bridge ACP that both clearly contemplate reduced visitor parking where on-street parking is available. So element 18, objective for the CBACP, states parking should be provided to ensure that the CBACP area can be provide for its residents and guests, but should balance this with the need to discourage private vehicle travel generally. It doesn't say each site, it says area, and clearly regard must be had for the availability of public parking. Just to quote the R codes, visitor parking may be reduced where is adequate on-street parking or public parking in the near vicinity of the development. Here we have both, not just one. So we have a planning framework clearly providing the criteria for allowing reduction in visitor bays that we meet, but also a common sense point of view. Why will visitors park on site when it's more convenient to just park on the street near the front door? On-street bays are clearly available, can be visible, and are easily managed to help activate the street, making it a safer place. So we're therefore respectfully requesting condition 9 change to only require 5 on-site visitor bays. And if the panel so inclined, amend condition 12 to require the creation of 4 embayed visitor bays on the street. The city doesn't want to allow them 4 embayed bays on the street, so we rely on the 57 or the 54 bays over the road, that it should be a condition to just have the bays removed. Our recommendation is that both conditions 9 and 12 both get amended as shown. So the 5 visitor bays and the 4 embayed bays on the street. And Angus and I are both available to take questions.
Thank you. Mr. Questions from panel members?
Yeah, I've got a
Yes,
question.
please.
Yes.
Okay, so the five visitor bays, they have to be accessed by the security gate.
Correct.
The 11 that you're talking about that would not be allocated to any units, but they would just, where are they located?
So there was 2 options that we put to the town as part of our initial application. We basically said our first preference is to have the 11 car parking bays on the street. So no controls, 4 and 7 on the riverside and 4 on our side. We said to them as an alternative approach, if you wanted to have 11 bays that aren't strata titled,
Yes.
that are just available for shared bays, if they're not yet taken up, then they can be used, but they're not permanently marked as 11 visitor bays. At the moment, they would be scattered throughout the development. They're not allocated on any plan. They could be in the basement. There's no condition requiring those 11 bays of where they actually have to be. So at the moment, we've got the 5 allocated right near the front
Yeah,
door.
and then the 11 that will not be allocated.
And then if there's 11 that aren't strata titled, that are part of a communal group somewhere, haven't been earmarked on a plan.
With strata titling, could the strata company then start playing around with those and say, well, you know, we might lease them out or we might.
Yes, that's what the strata company would do. And if they sold, then they would be sold by a license agreement.
Okay, and
Yes.
just one more question about, all right, so you're going to, with the provision of these the parking on the street, there's got to be landscaping, obviously, and that would be something that would be done as part of the development.
Absolutely.
And is there any thought given, therefore, to ongoing maintenance of those areas? I know that they're not part of the development site, but this has happened. I've seen this a few times lately where developments have taken on landscaping and maintained maintenance of those landscape verges. Is that something that could be considered?
Yeah, absolutely. The body corporate would look after it. It's the same as any verge for any residential building. I look after my verge. I'm sure most people would look after their verges right at their front door of the development.
Some do and some don't. Okay, all right, thank you.
Further questions, Peter?
Well, not the same question, I just didn't understand the answer. So you've got 11 bays, you've got 11 units that don't have.
We've got 11 units at the moment that don't have car parking.
And you're proposing to have 11 units with the chance of having a car bay? Or what?
Our preferred option is to give everyone a strata titled car parking bay and have 11 on the street. That's our first option. As a second option, we said to the city, if you wanted to have 11 bays that aren't strata titled bays, they could be licensed bays, so they're not part of the strata titled unit, then they could be a shared. So if someone doesn't need their bay, they can use it. They can offer it to the body corporate as a visitor bay. It's really hard to police.
You'd be selling a unit without a bay attached.
If someone wanted to buy a cheaper unit without a car bay, at the moment Angus hasn't sold any of them.
But why would they buy that?
It's $60,000.
Peter, at the moment, the way that it's offered is that there are 15 bays within, 16 bays within the ground floor car park that are all to be marked as visitor bays, and that's how they're shown on the strata plan.
Okay, and then how many apartments therefore are without bays?
And that's, as I understand it, concurring with the current approval, and that would leave us with 11 apartments, single bedroom apartments with no car
So I
bay.
get it, but the solution, if they're not part of the strata, you think you can still sell them with
I think that's really look, my clear
Yeah.
preference is if we're going to allow people to park in those bays.
It's gonna be in the rules too, so that would,
Yeah.
Yes.
that was and why didn't you appeal the condition or?
That's why we're here today.
Here today to go back to the panel.
Right, okay.
So if the 4 embayed parking bays weren't embayed, would you get more parking along the curb?
Means you'd have parking on
Both
both sides
sides.
of the street. At the moment, there's a no standing on that side of the street. I presume the city's done that for a reason, whether it's because the amount of crossovers are coming out, sight lines and things like that. It's a really quiet street. It's a cul-de-sac at one end. Potentially that could be an option, but yeah, I'm not a traffic expert. I'd have to rely on. That's a question for the city.
Okay. Right. Further questions of the presenters? No, thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
We'll go to the city now. Now there.
Good morning. Thank you through the chair. I think the only comment that the city would have is just to really support the RAR that's been submitted. The policy P210 street verges that's referenced within the RAR has now actually been adopted by council. It was adopted in the March meeting. That specifically says the use of the verge for constructed or residential and visitor car parking bays associated with developed applications in the Canning Bridge ACP area is not supported. The other comment is the R codes in relation to parking don't actually apply to this development because it's actually in the Canning Bridge Activity Centre plan area. And the city notes that there is a surplus of bays on site in accordance with the Canning Bridge ACP. The city, it's entirely up to the developer how they allocate those bays. It's not the city that's suggesting that bays should be sold without, that apartments should be sold without parking bays. There is a surplus on site and they can be allocated how they wish. But the city would not support any visitor parking bay outside the site. It will still be contained within the site. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions of the city officers? Yes, Lee.
Yeah, just want to know how much parking does take place on this street and how much parking in Olive Reserve during a regular weekday. I'm just trying to get an idea. The street to me appears to be fairly quiet and not cluttered with cars whenever I've passed. I'm just wondering if you can just comment on the street conditions.
Thank you through the chair. At the moment, you would probably see little on-street parking in that area. However, Olive Street Reserve has been earmarked as a dog park, and that will be shortly developed. So what we would consider we'll see a considerable uptake in the parking and the actual use of that reserve when that's fully developed. Thank you.
And just picking up my question, Fiona, in terms of would you be able to park on both sides of that street if it wasn't embayed?
I think at the present time there isn't a restriction. If the development, if no visitor parking or limited visitor parking was available on site, the city would actually introduce, I think we have indicated to the applicant that the city would likely introduce parking restrictions, which may also result as the dog park usage increases. But my understanding is at the moment it is unrestricted.
Okay, thank you. Further questions of the officers? No? Okay, thank you very much for that. We'll move on to the item. We have a recommendation for refusal with a number of reasons. Is there a mover for that? Yes, thank you, Councillor Ward. Is there a seconder for that motion? Okay, that lapses for want of a seconder. I'm moving then to an alternative motion. Is there an alternative motion?
Alternative provided.
Yes. No, all right. We'll move to so the first part of the motion will be that the Metro in a DAP resolves to accept. That's one.
Yes.
And then two, approve Form 2 application and accompanying plans of attachment 1 in accordance with. And then we deal with the 2 conditions. And I haven't got
So
readily available Mr. Reed's. Okay, yeah, thank you. Okay. So we follow the local planning scheme number 7, amending the following conditions. 9, a minimum of 5 visitor car parking bays for visitors to the development are to be provided on site and marked accordingly prior to the occupation of the development. And condition 12, prior to the submission of an occupancy permit application, all redundant crossovers shall be removed, 4 embayed visitor bays created and the virgin curbing reinstated to the satisfaction of the City of South Perth. So I'm seeking a mover for that.
I'll move that, but I want to add a condition about landscaping.
Well, would you like to, if you're going to move that, then let's
Yes.
add that now.
Yes, move that, and then we want to talk about the landscaping or put that as.
Do you want to add that in now? Because we might get a second. for
Okay,
that.
the proposed landscaping, associated with the embayments, to be provided and maintained, to the satisfaction of the City of South Perth.
Okay, thank you. Is there a seconder for that? Yes, Mr. Lee, thank you. All right.
Would I
Over
like
to
to
you
talk to it?
as the mover.
Yes, look, I've considered this very carefully, and I do understand councils have concerns about visitor parking and the impact it has on existing streetscapes. But I feel that in this case we've got Melville Parade, which is fairly, it's fairly quiet. It's a cul-de-sac. There's not a lot of parking that is occurring from what I can observe. There's also Olive Reserve, which is close to the proposed development site. So on that basis, I don't see it as a location where there's going to be an enormous take-up as a result of visitors parking. The other issue that it's not really something that comes into the planning framework necessarily, but I do hear the problem of providing on-site parking for apartments, and I think that is probably a valid problem for this particular developer, and may well be resulting, as it has been presented here, in a difficulty in on-selling these apartments. And I think the need to get a development of this kind up and running is extremely important. So for those 2 reasons, I also think the proposal for embayed parking, car parking provision is going to be a positive thing. You're going to have, that's going to take up the redundant crossovers and will allow for landscaping within those verge areas, which I think will probably be very desirable. So for all those reasons, I am going to support that.
Thank you.
Proposal. Yes.
Okay, and Mr. Lee as seconder.
Yeah, I came here with a very open mind. I was struggling to know which side to think about this, but from against the proposed, the project going ahead that where we're talking about it, we had already given this developer an extra floor, I think, from memory. The sort of commercial attitudes aren't really our problem, and the danger is it won't just be this site, but on the other side, it is a very good project. The economy's choking without any housing. I know from my own point of view, it's so hard to get anything up and running at the moment. If you're selling things at $12,000 a square metre here, that makes sense. I know from my position on foundation housing, the 112 units that we bought for affordable housing, the last 3 we let were in MIDAP, were the ones without power base. So there's reality that makes a huge difference still in the economy at the moment. And the fact that you might get started in July is just it's too important for the state to not to miss something like that. The city has got a scheme here to encourage density in the area, and because of the issues that we mentioned in terms of it's a one-sided street, the development's only on that side, there are car parking positions available, that Paradiso has already created a precedent. I'm happy to support the project, the changes to the approval so that the project can go ahead.
Thank you. Further speakers? Councillor Wall.
Hello, sorry, I'd just like to speak briefly against this, and I'm just supporting the officer's recommendation. The reason being is that parking is also very acutely an issue within the city of South Perth. Economic factors, as we know, is not really a proper valid planning consideration. I do appreciate that that there is a housing shortage at the moment, and of course we're all trying to encourage that. However, creating a precedent, particularly in an area where we are encouraging the infill development of the development of more of these types of developments, creating a precedent such as the Paradiso down the road. Now, I don't know if you're aware, but the Paradiso development down the road has already caused quite a number of issues of parking, particularly within that street, and the councillors are receiving quite a number of complaints about that down there as well. So, and just finally, the last note is I note that there was a comment in there that it's hard for a strata to police internal visitor bays, and I think that the point of that is for it to go onto the street, so that then the responsibility for policing that, you know, falls onto the local government, which adds to the responsibility for the local government. I know our business right here is part of a strata development, and we very effectively police the parking bays downstairs. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I support the alternative motion. I'm quite satisfied that this fits within the intent of the Canning Bridge Activity Centre plan. It is in a location which is reasonably isolated, being a cul-de-sac, and as already mentioned, there's only development on one side of the road. So I think this presents a slightly different situation to Paradiso. So I don't see this as really being something that would be taken up or can be taken up by other developers, because this is a different situation to me. So I'm quite happy with the recommendation that we've got before us. So back to you, Ms. O'Donoghue.
Yeah, look, I don't have anything further to add, except this is a really important development, and it's really worthwhile, and I think we need to get it up and running, and I think this might resolve a pretty big issue for the developer and the applicant.
All right, thank you. That ends the debate. I'll now put the motion to approve or amend those conditions and add a further condition. All those in favour? Against? That's carried 3-1. Thank you. Moving on now to the second item. Item 3.1. We have a number of presentations, and I'm going to just remind people, if we can, please try and keep to the 3 minutes with your presentation. So the first one is Mr. Russell. He's online. Mr. Russell.
Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Okay, yes, so good morning, everybody. I would just like to start by saying how disheartened and disenfranchised I and the community must feel because the city has not included our community responses within the RAR. This needs to be compared to the applicant where their reports are fully detailed within. What we have instead is the city summarising the community responses into one-liners of their own making, and you, the DAP members, being decision makers, are required to accept this and to supposedly make an informed decision based upon this. This is not fair nor reasonable. Now, I cannot speak for other responders, but I've made a very detailed and comprehensive response. However, the panel will not be able to view this as part of the RAR, and importantly, my response will not go on the public record. Because I'm limited to 3 minutes, and I will give the panel an example of what I noted and why this development application must be refused on the basis of a previous SAT finding. So I'll make reference to an earlier SAT finding, which is WASAT 63 in 2021, regarding a childcare development application where it was a refusal was upheld. The application was refused for various reasons. However, a contentious subject was the applicant's acoustic report, authored by Mr. Reynolds, who I believe may also be the same author of the Birdwood acoustic report, and specifically the sound power of children at play. Mr. Reynolds then used the sound power, 10 children of 83 dBA, which is the same used for the Birdwood report. However, this was challenged by Mr. Warpenius, an independent acoustic specialist, in that the guidelines set by the Association of Australasian Acoustical Consultants with AAAC, which are contemporary to Mr. Reynolds' value, would set the level from 83 to 90 dBA of 10 children, depending on the age of the child, and this would increase with additional children based upon a logarithmic equation. Indeed, Warpenius considered 83 dBA as quiet for children playing, and this would be routinely exceeded and closer to 90 dBA. In its judgment, SAT favoured Warpenius in terms of the higher sound power, as his approach is consistent with the independent guidelines prepared by the acoustic consultants across Australia and New Zealand, by stating, and I quote, "While Mr. Reynolds has used the same assumption for sound power level of 83 dBA for 15 years, we prefer the approach of Mr. Warpenius, which takes account of the ACCC guidelines which have been prepared and revised in that time." Furthermore, it is noted that an acoustic report accompanying a childcare centre recommended for approval by the city and subsequently approved by council at 50 Dyson Street, Kensington, also made reference to the ACCC sound power value for 10 block children at play of 87 dBA, which is higher than the value given within the Birdwood value of 83 dBA. Indeed, from the AAAC equation given, then additional children contribute additional power sound levels. For example, an additional 10 children, that is total of 20, will contribute an additional 3 dB, which results in 90 dB, to which Warpenius is considered more likely. It is strange how the city has access to both acoustic reports, both Birdwood and Dyson, but remain ironically silent here with respect to the difference in the power sound source values, yet side with the Birdwood applicant. The question, therefore, is the city actually being diligent in their assessment? To this end, as a sound power source of children at play, which is a fundamental input to the acoustic report, is incorrect at 83 dBA, then the panel must consider the acoustic report invalid. To do so otherwise would make a mockery of the previous SAT finding and the city recommending approval for the Dyson Childcare Centre. Henceforth, as the acoustic report, which should be considered invalid, being a fundamental element to the decision making to understand if the immunity of the locals due to noise impact is impacted, then under the deemed provisions, the development application must be refused. This is particularly so when considering that because this development is discretionary within a residential area, which by its nature will subject the local community to immunity loss, then the panel should take a cautionary and conservative approach. That is, if there is an element of doubt, then a refusal should apply. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. Questions of Mr. Russell from panel members? Mr. Russell, why do you believe that SAT matter is directly transferable to this matter?
because it makes a finding on the acoustic report validity. It's basically set a basis to what sound values should be used for children that play at a childcare centre, and that's based upon best practice, best contemporary practice, which is set by the AAAC. That is a SAT finding.
Yes, I agree with it. It's a SAT finding, yes. Okay, thank you. No further questions. We'll move on to Mr.
Do
Bassett. Mr. Bassett. Thank you.
Thank you for the opportunity to present to the panel. My name is John Bassett. I live at 14 Hobbs Avenue, which is adjacent to the property in question here. My PhD is in acoustics, and I have acted as an acoustic consultant at various times. And so I'll primarily address the acoustic report, but I'll just make comment as far as firstly, the council recommendations, which do not, as Mr. Russell has stated, reflect the input from the community on this issue. We certainly agree with the previous finding of the council, and stunned actually at the complete flip by the council from refusing the development to then recommending to this panel that it be approved when there has been virtually no change in the proposal from the proponent. Another thing that I find quite interesting is there is no needs analysis here. So we're looking at the potential for the loss of amenity to the community without any capture of whether this particular facility is needed by the wider community. There are 4 childcare centres within a kilometre of this site. It creates the possibility that, in fact, the establishment of this site may drive other childcare centres within the region out of business. The other point is the built form. The built form effectively extends the commercial structure into the residential area. Other childcare centres in the region are within existing houses, but this is very clearly a commercial structure being extended into the residential area. Traffic impact, I would suggest, without being an expert in the field, is cursory, because the neighbourhood recognises that most of the traffic that happens in this area, particularly around school time, flows from Murray Street down Hobbs Avenue and Birdwood. That has not been assessed in the traffic report. The traffic report looks at entry from Canning Highway. And finally, the acoustic report. So as I said, I've acted as a consultant, and one of the things that you see in these kind of applications is that the proponent expects the consultant to produce a report that supports their application. I've certainly had experience where you come under pressure by the proponent to produce such a report. And I'm sure the panel is familiar with this kind of game that then occurs, where the proponent produces a report that supports the application. If the opponents to the proposal can afford it, they then employ a acoustic consultant to look at that proposal. I provided council with an acoustic report in relation to this application. That report did not make it to you through council. It has since been forwarded to you as part of my presentation here today. The game then becomes one of trying to find the truth, if you like, in what is being presented. The proponent will usually find a way to present the application in a way that puts it in a positive light. And of course, the opponents usually look to the consultant to find the opposite. In that regard, to my mind, it falls to the panel to seek independent advice on the application. So what I recommend to the panel is that this application be deferred until you've received independent advice on this particular proposal. What we see in the proposal is a presentation of the estimates of the project that I suggest underestimate the noise level from the childcare centre and overestimate the noise level in the environment. In doing so, show that the requirements are met. In my report, by looking at, first up, what the expected background noise level is, the actual expected background noise level, in my opinion, has been overstated, although it probably meets the criteria. But the level of the children in the childcare centre, I suggest, has been underestimated. It's based on a number of 10 children in the play area. The centre has a capacity of 86. The proponent suggests that it would be something like 35 in the morning. So it's reasonable to expect at least double the number of children in the play area, which will give us an increase in noise level above what has been stated by the proponent, such that it will show that the application does not meet the criteria. Just to finish, the other point as far as noise is concerned is that it will primarily be an issue for the residents at 3 Birdwood. All the air conditioning plants are placed along that wall. I cannot see any way that you can achieve the noise reduction level from those air conditioning units to the property over a distance of 4 metres without major construction, which as a result will restrict the airflow to those plants. So it looks like the noise from the plant will be above the accepted level at that residence.
Thank you, Mr. Bassett. Excuse me. Our members' questions of Mr. Bassett.
You've gone to a lot of work. I can see that. I gather that you've spoken to the city officers regarding your concerns. Have you actually been in there and said, well, I've done this work and it shows that your acoustic report is that you're supporting is lacking? I just wondered
for the next council meeting to have that discussion.
So I wondered if you'd actually presented your data and your information to the city officers, because that's from their perspective. I'm hearing that their health officers have assessed the acoustic report and found it to be satisfactory. So given that, I just wondered if you'd actually made an approach to the officers.
No, and I'd question whether the council has capacity to actually assess the level of this report.
The only other thing I was going to say was you made a comment about the fact that a lot of childcare centres and are created using existing housing stock, and you see this one as being commercial. I just wondered if you had considered the fact that this is a purpose-built childcare centre. It's probably got to operate better than trying to convert an existing house for that purpose. Was that something that you considered?
Not specifically. I mean, I look at it from the perspective of the streetscape.
From the streetscape?
Yep.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Is the field of acoustic analysis one where you could, for the same proposal, get a variety of opinions, or is it so scientific that you could only come to one conclusion?
Most of my work I've done in New South Wales, which is much more stringent than here. So there are no measurements. So normally my experience is you would actually go out on site and make measurements. That is not how Western Australia operates. So it operates on the basis of assumptions to start But the second part, as far as the science is concerned, you can't really scientifically measure the level of children in a playground in this circumstance, unless you go out to other circumstances and make measurements in those places. I think this is where Mr. Russell's reference to the previous finding is that that's what you would look for. There's none of that in this acoustics report. So it's not an exact science, and in that regard, it's always worth remembering that what we're considering is people's immunity. So you can produce the numbers that state that sound levels would be at a particular level, but then you have to map that against people's expectations of the amenity of their neighbourhood.
So the real concern comes down to the level of noise of children playing or that sort of thing.
Yes. I have two screaming children next to me. I know how maddening that can be. So, yeah, we will probably be masked by it, but for the people in Birdwood, it's quite an increase in level in the neighbourhood.
Further questions of Mr. Massett? No? Councillor. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Move to Greg Davies and Regan Kate. Do you gentlemen want to do your presentations together?
Separate PowerPoints. That's probably easier.
Are they? All right, okay, we'll do one at a time.
Yeah.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah,
Thank you.
all good.
Thank you for the opportunity to talk to you. I really just wanted to touch on I suppose the macro site aspects that have informed our design and layout. The first one being the northern aspect and trying to utilise that as much as possible in terms of solar gain to both the building but also for the outdoor play area. And as a result of that, we're restricting the exposure to the east and particularly the harsher west. We have deliberately positioned the play area towards the corner and the busier road of Birdwood and away as much as possible from the residences or the adjacent residences. And we've also the quietest area to the closest house. So the infants are in that side and they're not going to, both in play and outside and inside, they're not going to be producing anywhere near as much noise as the others. The car park, we located off the secondary street to act as access obviously, but also act as a buffer again to the residences. And we've heavily landscaped either side of the crossover to ameliorate the effect of the hard standing. From a building point of view, we've made sure we've got overhangs that will allow the winter sun in and keep the worst of the summer sun away from the building facade. And we also believe those overhangs will give us good light and shadow across the facade as well. We've deliberately kept it low key to not impact on the streetscape, and it is set a fair way back in any case. And we also believe in the value of the landscaping. So we've heavily landscaped our site, but also the verge to try to contribute to that streetscape also. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions, Mr. Davies?
Yeah, I've got one
Yes.
question. Fencing types. I notice that you've got masonry boundary fence front, but going down the side, you've got colour bond. Has this issue been raised? Because it's come up before, whether children play and they muck around, they throw balls bang against a colour-bomb fence could be noisy. Was any consideration given to a more suitable form of acoustic fencing? I know it's one that I can think of, one that we did in Morley, where that was a requirement, and I just wondered, because you do have that spontaneous play that can cause added noise.
That's true. The simple answer is no, but it is also at the quieter users will be at that end of the building. So we're not anticipating too many football matches at that end.
That's what I was thinking of.
Further questions of Mr. Davies? Yes.
I noticed with the design review panels between 2 and 3, there was a couple of changes. You sort of the aesthetics went from green to orange. Was there much change between DR2 and DR3?
I'm just trying to recall what that was, and I've got I think it was because the panel wanted the introduction of face brickwork to be more aligned with the area, and as a result, I did a bit of a survey through the area, and about 30% of the stock in the area that were face brickwork. So I'm pretty sure that was why we went from green to orange, which was interesting that happened because we hadn't really changed the facade in any case. There was discussion around the fence as well, but I think that was addressed at 2, and that was in discussion with the council also.
It's not a bad position anyway.
Yeah, no,
unusual.
No, sure. But I think it was around a comment about a lack of face brickwork on the facade.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Mr. Cope.
Good morning, panel members. As you know, I'm here to speak in support of the childcare premises at 5 to 7 Thurgood Avenue, Como. Firstly, I just want to express support for the officer recommendation of approval, as well as the city's assessments within their responsible authority report. Ultimately, we consider the proposal to be a well-located childcare premises that has been designed to ensure no negative impacts on the adjoining residential community. The site is located at the intersection of Birdwood Avenue and Throstle Street, which is less than 50 metres from commercial development, Farmer Jack's on Canning Highway, and only 220 metres from Collier Primary School. Further beyond this immediate site context, there are another 4 local schools and a growing residential community within the Canning Bridge Activity Centre precinct, which is slowly being realised. This local context, I feel, contributes to a growing demand for the childcare premises service in the area. And I think the uptake will be positive in the future as that residential community grows. The assessment process and compliance with the applicable planning framework was addressed in detail within the RAR report, so I won't rehash any of this information other than to simply convey that very recently the City of South Perth Local Planning Scheme 7 was recently gazetted, and that change or shift in the planning framework essentially reduced a significant amount of discretion that was being contemplated by this application, to a point where the actual proposal is essentially compliant with nearly all the development controls, with I think the exception of the minor setback variation. Briefly touching on the submissions, the city did have a summary in our report, with the key issues being land use compatibility, tree removal, traffic and parking, operating hours and noise. Just briefly to touch on the acoustic side of things, given we've heard a bit about that today, we did speak with our acoustic consultant, Mr. Tim Reynolds, sort of briefly ahead of this meeting, and discussed, I guess, the differences in methodology between the two, and he conveyed that yes, they are different methodologies, and he's been using his for years, and there is an alternate methodology that was referred to in that SAT case, but his comments were that both methodologies would result in a similar outcome as in compliance with the Environmental Protection Noise Regs. And I think it's also important to remember that that legislation and those noise requirements exist separate to the planning framework. So regardless, there are separate legislative requirements to comply with prescribed noise levels in this area. So if there are concerns around exceedances to those noise levels, the City of South Perth are able to go out on site, take measurements, and if they are found to be exceeding those noise levels, there are compliance measures that can be taken to ensure they are enforced. Briefly, just touching on the conditions of approval, we support all of them. The only one we want deleted is condition 13, which looks at the enclosure of the bin store. At present, we've got sort of aluminium battens proposed on one side and the structure not roofed. We feel that this is, I guess, more appropriate because if the bin store was enclosed and screened on all sides, the actual natural ventilation to that space would be reduced, and there'd be a much greater reliance on cleaning, mechanical ventilation, all that sort of stuff to that area. And I think the location of the bin store is separated from residents by being sort of centrally located within the car park. So there's not likely to be any amenity impacts to adjoining properties. And given its location, it's going to be, I guess the onus is going to be put on the operator of the childcare centre to maintain that area to ensure the amenity impact for the actual parents and kids frequenting the centre is kept to an appropriate level. Just to wrap up, we support the opposite recommendation or refusal and suggest that this is the correct and preferable decision for the panel to make today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Coke. Questions of Mr. Coke? Mr. Coke, one of the previous presenters mentioned that there are no needs analysis and that this is likely to impact on existing childcare centres. Was there any work done in that sort of area?
There wasn't a specific needs assessment done. I think some of the existing centres in the area are like your typical family daycares, which are much smaller in scale and are converted sort of residential homes. So I guess the impact of those centres and the offering that they provide is quite different to what we are proposing here, being a purpose-built centre. And I think the proximity to the Collier Primary School as well as other local schools in the area, I think sort of suggests that there will be a sufficient demand, and obviously with the residential community growing in the area, we were certainly very comfortable that there were going to be enough kids to service all the centres in the area.
Okay, thank you for that. And the other point raised was that the TAS didn't consider vehicles coming via Murray Street. Can you comment on?
Not an expert in traffic engineering, and I don't have the report in front of me myself at the moment, so I couldn't say yay or nay to the appropriateness of that. The only thing I would suggest is the city's got internal traffic engineers that did review the report, and it underwent revision and additional modelling to consider Farmer Jack's traffic and everything like that. So there was certainly a fair bit of backwards and forwards on that technical documentation, I guess, to a point where we got the city's technical officers happy with the modelling and analysis that was done as part of that report.
Okay. Sorry, just going back to that condition 13, is there some way of enclosing it and still achieving or satisfying those concerns that you raised?
I think in terms of natural ventilation and I guess impact to neighbours and that sort of stuff, I mean, we certainly can enclose it, and I think the impact will, I guess, be a bulkier structure within a car park that's more difficult to ventilate. But it can be done. We just don't feel it's necessary, and I guess the outcome will be more negative, I guess, having it being a fully enclosed structure with the roof.
Okay, I'll put that to the city officers as well. Thank you. No further questions, Mr. Cake? No? Okay, thank you. Move on to the city officers now. Or just taking questions.
Thank you through the chair. Courtney Wynn will respond from the city. Thank you.
Yeah. So in relation to the acoustic modelling as outlined with the 13 response, the city has reviewed the applicant's acoustic report and supports the methodology and modelling that was used in that report. We do have a recommended condition that they undertake a noise management plan, which would consider the more day-to-day activities of the children and things like that on the site. And as the applicant noted as well, there is the environmental noise regulations that anyone would have to comply with if there was complaints received once it was occupied. In relation to the traffic impact statement, this again was reviewed by the city's traffic engineer, and the final traffic impact statement was supported by the city in terms of the methodology and the modelling used. And the city is satisfied that the proposal would not have a detrimental impact on the existing road network. In relation to condition number 13, this was a recommendation from the city's environmental health department. The city has a local health law which does require that odour impacts are contained on site, and it was recommended that a roof would be the best way, considering that there would be nappies and other odorous material in the bins.
Okay, thank you. Questions? No. No questions. Okay, all right. Just following up on that condition 13 then, is there another way of enclosing that so that it is not a bulky building out in the car park? Would there be another way of achieving the same outcome?
Through the chair, there may well be a design solution to enclose the bin store that, well, I'm not sure how it could, doesn't involve a roof, but we're open to suggestions as to how that can be enclosed.
Thank you.
I have one question,
yes,
just about the
please.
fencing. You possibly heard me discuss that before. I just want to make sure that you're satisfied that the colour-bomb fencing is appropriate, given that it will be located where the play area is in terms of spontaneous play that might result in things being hit against the colour bond fence. Quite happy with that?
Yeah, so that was obviously part of the acoustic report review, and no concerns were raised by our officers, but we wouldn't object to a masonry fence being constructed in that play area just to fully enclose it, if that's what the panel wishes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. No further questions? Okay, thank you, officers, for that. We'll move on to the item then. There's a recommendation for approval with conditions. Is there a mover for that? Yes, Lee O'Donoghue, thank you. Seconder for that, Mr. Lee, thank you. Over to you.
Okay, look, I acknowledge the concerns that residents raise with regard to these childcare centres, and the concerns that you've raised, we hear them quite a lot, and in these instances we have to look very carefully at everything that's presented to us. And in this instance, I think there are some, first of all, I would like to say that I have no doubt that this childcare centre is required and will be used and will be hooked up in no time. These are very essential community activities, and they are finding their way more and more into these sites because we've got established suburbs where there simply isn't the land to provide them elsewhere. In this instance, you've got a corner site that is going to be designed in such a way that you've got taking advantage of its northern orientation. So that's fantastic from the point of view of landscaping and outdoor areas for the children. The parking has been located at the rear, so I think that's a good outcome as well. The fact that it is purpose-built, I think, is also very important. I think that a number of issues that residents may be concerned with are better addressed when you have a purpose-built proposal such as this one. All in all, I think this has been well thought out. It's gone through the design review process a number of times, and I think the outcome is quite positive. The streetscape, it's not two-storied, it's single, it's fairly simple in its design. There'll be there's significant landscaping provided. I think that it's got a lot of merit. And I'm also buoyed by the fact that council officers have gone through and they have carefully considered the traffic and the acoustic issues and feel confident that they have been satisfactorily addressed, and there is that compliance issue that council will have to deal with if complaints are made. So all in all, I think this is a worthwhile development and proposal, and I'm happy to support it. And I'm not necessarily supportive of removing condition 13.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Lee.
So in terms of the noise, I understand the worries of the surrounding residents, but there are noise regulations, there are compliance measures, and there's a condition about a noise plan that need to be structured. So from my point of view, that covers that. Hopefully it won't be a problem. From a design point of view, it's a sustainable building, it's a modest building. It is purpose driven. That's why it's not looking like a little house, because that's not what it is. And I think it's quite a good plan. Condition 13, I'm pretty sure that the operators will not want smells in the middle of their car park near their door, those sorts of things. So I'm not sure the conditions needed. I think as soon as you put a roof on it, you start and close it in, you actually create more heat, and it might be causing more of a problem in doing that. I think it's something that they will need to solve, otherwise they'll have a problem with their staff and visitors. So I'm not sure whether we should change the condition at all. But I do think that the operators will sort it out, because it'll be a problem. It's smelling. And the bulk argument I don't quite get, because you just take the walls up a bit more and put a roof on it. So not actually sure how we deal with that.
Are you suggesting an amendment to that?
Well, Lee, you were leaving it in there, were you?
I was, only because I think that it's something that, that the architect can probably find a way around in terms of ventilation.
They'll need
and
to.
I don't, rats are prevalent in these areas. So look, I just thought that it was something. It's a design problem, but I think they can probably come up with some sort of solution to ensure ventilation.
Yeah,
I hear what you say.
That's slightly different condition than telling them
debate at the moment, but
yeah. Okay.
Mr. Lee's got the floor.
So I think if we would change the condition so that there was a requirement for the developer to sort out something that the council was happy with, rather than us prescribing how they do it.
Yeah.
Might be a better condition.
So, Mr. Lee, are you suggesting that 13 be modified so we modify the bin store to a fully enclosed structure to achieve some outcome?
Well, I think it's all right to leave to have the bin store modified in a way that was acceptable to council, because there are different, rather than prescribing that it'll be fully enclosed and roofed and.
Well, I think that leaves it a bit uncertain then as to what.
Well, sorry, the proponent has said they're unhappy with the condition as it is, because they don't think that it's necessary, and that it might actually not contribute to solving the problem. I'm not going to tell them how to solve the problem, but that leaves it up to them to sort out to council satisfaction, which might end up being fully enclosed and ventilated.
Okay. All right. So what's are you for modifying the condition, or you want to modify the condition?
I think it would be wise to do that, because
what's the words?
That the proponent modify the bin store to ensure that odours and pests and other issues are dealt with to the satisfaction of council.
Eliminated. Odours and vermin are considered. The satisfaction. So there's amendment been presented by Mr. Lee, which would remove part of the condition after, this is where, modifying the bin store and we're removing a fully enclosed structure, including a roof, and inserting to ensure that odours and vermin are considered to the satisfaction of the City of South Perth.
So it could be a mesh on the top.
Yeah, so,
it's not,
so Mr. Lee, is there a seconder for that?
I'll second.
Okay. Do we need to debate that any further? Does anybody want to speak on that amendment? No? All right, I shall put the amendment. All in favour? Yes, that's carried unanimously. Thank you. Floor's still with you, but you done? Okay, further speakers on this? Councillor Ward, did you want to say anything? No? I'm just going to quickly comment on the item. I'm fully supportive of it. I just want to mention that I don't think it's wise to take a previous SAT case and simply transfer what happened there into these situations. And quite clearly, when that matter was being dealt with, it did say that the case doesn't turn only on noise. And there are other factors that need to be considered. So we need to treat each of the applications on their own merits. So I'm not going to say any more at this stage, but I do support the proposal. I think it's been designed well. I think, as has been said before, there are other regulations around noise that can be dealt with through compliance measures. Back to you, Ms. O'Donoghue. To wind up the
No
debate.
further comment.
No further comment? All right, I'll put the motion as amended. All in favour? That's carried unanimously. Thank you very much for that. There are, just moving on, there's no SAT reconsiderations. Noting SAT matters, applications. Is there any general business? I have to ask that. No, good. Okay, I close the meeting at what's the time? At 10:52. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance.
Thank you, everyone.